Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you all. So today we're going to be doing another one of our metagame analysis breakdowns, and I figured this time we're going to be covering a whole month's worth of data from Diamond 1 decks. The reason is because last time we did a metagame analysis, it was exclusively Duelist Cup decks. We didn't at all factor in any of the decks that hit Diamond. So I wanted to go back to the last date we left off for a analysis of Diamond decks was December 7th. It was right before the Duelist Cup, just a few days before. So I decided to pull data from the 8th, that day after, that first day we didn't have data for, all the way to, at the time I'm recording this, yesterday, January 9th. For that reason, I've decided to only pull data from Diamond 1 decks, because that was just much more easily accessible. Otherwise, I'd have to sift through like so many decks. It'd just take hours to pick out all the Diamond and Diamond 1 decks, and I figured since we're looking at a whole month's worth of data at a time instead of like 2 weeks at a time, like we normally tend to do with these videos, or have tended to do in the past rather, we could just go ahead and take a look only at Diamond 1 decks. Now, I will say that the data is going to look a little bit different as a result of only looking at Diamond 1 decks as opposed to all decks that have reached Diamond. When we're looking at every deck that has reached Diamond, we're going to see just a lot more variety in general, like a much bigger other category. So usually the other category in our breakdowns tend to be around like 55%. This time it's like 43 and some change percent. That's because just, again, there's a bit of a narrower variety of decks that tend to hit Diamond 1. So I just want everybody to keep that in mind as we're taking a look at these two different points of data, because we will be comparing the last month of Diamond decks to this month of Diamond 1 decks, but just keep that discrepancy in mind. It is something important, I think, to bear in mind when looking at data like this. So yeah, without further ado, let's just go ahead and get straight into it. But actually, before we do, real quick, I just want to real quick mention the Patreon. If you're looking for some more daily Master Duel content, in addition to what gets posted here on YouTube, feel free to check out the link in the description. There you will find a link to my Patreon page where, as I said, more daily Master Duel content is going to get posted. It's just $5 a month, so that's the price you would pay for a booster pack, and you get a lot more value than a pack full of filler. Over there, we're going to have some exclusive games that are only on the Patreon, some previews of upcoming videos, Q&As, and then of course you can also have your name featured in the credit sequence at the end of every single video. There are also more perks that I'm planning on implementing in the future as well, so feel free to check that out if you want some more daily Master Duel action over there. Alright, so yeah, let's just go ahead and take a look at, we're going to start actually by looking at the last month's worth of Diamond decks, and then like I said, we'll compare that to the current month's, the 8th to the 9th. So let's look at the last set of data from the last meta-analysis first. Alright, so this is going to be from, as you can see here, November 10th to December 7th. This is from the last, ranked ladder analysis that we did. Keep in mind, again, this is all decks that hit both Diamond 5 and Diamond 1, whereas the data we're going to look at here in a bit is only Diamond 1. So we saw a pretty, relatively expected spread of decks here. This was before Runic came out, keep in mind, which is why we're seeing Eldritch here up at 3.8%. We'll actually talk about that a little bit later, about the relationship between Runic and Eldritch. But, Branded Despia and Swordsoul very close, with Branded Despia very barely eking out over Swordsoul. Marines is actually following up as like the next most played deck, which is not a surprise. I've seen it a fair bit on the ladder. It's a very consistent deck. It has a lot of like 1 or 2 card combos, and it ends on a big like Towers monster. So with also like a searchable, hand trap, a literal trap card that can be played from the hand. So not surprising to see Marines is that high. Flandres, this was like a little bit, no, this was, I think it was the 10th, right, of November when the Wind Barrier statue got banned. So by this point, I think, yeah, we'd had a decent bit of time with Flandres not having the Wind Barrier statue, and still proved to be about, tier 2, 4.7% as represented here. And then we saw, again, some more of the usual suspects. Eldritch, Dragon Link, and Endymion, ever since getting Beyond the Pendulum, has been making very consistent appearances here on these meta reports. So, again, this was Diamond decks from the last season, from, mostly Season 11, or from the season before last, rather, mostly Season 11, up to the Duelist Cup in Season 12. So, let's take a look at how things have changed since then. Okay, so these are the decks that have hit Diamond 1 from December 8th to January 9th. And as you can see, there is a huge difference in the data. This does also, factor in Runics, of course, that being the biggest difference, is that Runics and Labyrinth, that secret pack entered the meta. But even more notably than that, we'll actually talk about that here in a moment. I think even more notably than that is the despair, I can never say that word correctly, the difference between Swordsoul Tenny and Branded Despia. 7% in Swordsoul Tenny's favor, which is not something that I personally was really expecting to see. We've actually seen in past meta-analysis, like Swordsoul Tenny get like a decent edge above Branded Despia, right? Like a few percent. It's like, oh, that's a little surprising, but they're still pretty much the same. That's not the case here. 7% is a lot. That's like a lot. And for Branded Despia to be under 10% representation is very surprising to me. Now, I'm trying to, honestly, still even now as I'm recording this video, I definitely thought about this a good bit beforehand, but I'm trying to, like, what exactly do we make of this, right? I think there's a couple of different factors that could possibly play into it. The main one, and I've been talking about this all video, we do have to keep in mind that this time we're only looking at decks that have hit specifically Diamond 1. And I do think that is a factor. Like, it's definitely a factor to the other category being significantly smaller, for sure. But I also think it's a factor towards the uptick of representation in Swordsoul Tenny, right? A lot of people who are hitting Diamond 1 have hit Diamond 1 in the past, and a lot of those people have used Swordsoul Tenny, either are, obviously currently still using it, or have also used it quite a bit in the past. And I've talked about this a lot in my Swordsoul Tenny videos, right? The idea that this deck is relatively unchanged for pretty much the entire time it's been in Master Duel. Honestly, there was, when Halki Fibrax got banned, sure, the deck took out the Halkin Auroradon engine, and that was a significant, I don't want to call it a significant loss, because really that was like a format, wide impact of Hulk being banned. There were a lot of decks that felt it. There were a lot of decks that felt it a lot more than Swordsoul Tenny. I mean, Adventure Tenny it's still kind of a deck. Like, I've come across it every now and then, but it's pretty much not a deck anymore because Hulk got banned. So, yeah, it's the deck has, like I said, mostly remained relatively unchanged. Like, even before Hulk got banned, right? The combo line was still more often than not just going to end you on, what else but Chi Shao plus Baron, and then sometimes also Protoss and or Blackout as well. The main point that I'm getting at here is that because Swordsoul Tenny has gone so unchanged for so long, and I definitely can attest to this as well, it's a lot of people's, like, pet deck, or like the comfort choice, right? Because we're so familiar with it by this point, and it's so consistently good. It's like, I could play, like, even Branded Despia. It has been around for quite a few months now, but even then, it's still not anywhere near as long as Swordsoul Tenny has been in the meta. So it's like, it's just the one that I think people are more familiar with, and then in turn more comfortable falling back on. I do think Swordsoul Tenny is also more consistent than Branded Despia. I think Branded Despia is a bit more powerful when it goes off than Swordsoul Tenny, but in terms of just raw consistency and being able to put out that same board over and over again and do so very well in almost every single game it plays, Swordsoul Tenny, I think, has a slight consistency edge over Branded Despia. Especially, and we're going to see that moving forward as well with Branded Despia just now recently taking a consistency hit with Aliber going to 2. So, yeah, when it comes to Diamond 1 especially, I think we're going to keep seeing Swordsoul Tenny. And it's funny, by this standard, by this particular, only looking at Diamond 1 decks, you could even make an argument that Branded Despia isn't even really a tier 1 deck under this metric, right? So it's interesting how much more Swordsoul Tenny is being played, specifically getting to Diamond 1 within the Diamond rank, than something like Branded Despia. This Rune, those are honestly the most surprising things to me. Rune coming in at 8.7% after being introduced, it makes a lot of sense to me now. It definitely would have surprised me had you told me that, like, when the pack first got released. Once again, I kept saying this because it really did. Runic flew so far over my head when it first got released. I didn't really think about it even being like the new Floodgate deck of choice, but it very much is coming at 8.7%. Flandreese coming up right behind it at 6.5%. It's not budged at all. This deck, like, it's funny because, I thought, when people were saying, oh, it's dead, the deck relied so hard on Wind Barrier Statue, I was like, well, no, that's definitely not right. But I definitely still expected it to go down to, like, tier 3, or, like, show a significant drop in play, but it really hasn't. Flandreese has been pretty consistently like the 3rd or 4th most played deck since its release, and even after the Wind Barrier statue's gotten banned. So, been seeing it there. Emancipator at 4.8%. It's pretty expected to see, along with Dragon Link at 4.8%. This is actually another, I think, unique bit of being specifically Diamond 1 ranked decks, is that Dragon Link, when we're only looking at Diamond decks, or we're only looking at like the Duelist Cup decks that have made it to the next phase, we didn't really see Dragon Link really ever represented among the top decks like it is right here. But we are again seeing it now that, you know, we're only looking at Diamond 1 decks, and that makes sense to me, because I think that Dragon Link is one of those decks that, you know, the people who really know it can really pilot it, you know, exceptionally well. It's got a very high skill ceiling. It can be a bit of a curve to learn, or rather the learning curve can be a bit steep, but it's got a very high skill ceiling. And so people who can pilot Dragon Link can definitely do a lot more with it than, you know, someone like me who is like dabbled in the deck, but definitely not very like super fluent in it at all. So, yeah, it's not surprising to see Dragon Link more represented as we're looking at higher ranked decks, because again, the people who are, you know, able to use that deck well can take it to that, you know, upper rank there. We got Dinomorphia here at 3%, along with Endymion at 3%. Endymion at 3% isn't surprising to me. Endymion, as I said before, we've consistently, ever since Beyond the Pendulum, and even a bit before Beyond the Pendulum got released, honestly, Endymion has just kind of been a consistent staying force within the meta. It's you know, I can very safely call it the best Pendulum deck, at least again just in terms of like the raw data from Diamond rank anyway. We did see Pendulum Magician quite a bit during the Duelist Cup. During the Duelist Cup in particular, that FTK build got a lot more popular, but with the Starving Venom going to 1, was it, I believe? Yeah, I don't think we'll be seeing that OTK, or Pendulum Magicians in general, but definitely not that build. We won't be seeing it anymore. And Pendulum Magicians, I expect we'll see less and less. Endymion, as I said, in my opinion, is just the best Pendulum deck. Dinomorphia at 3% is pretty expected, honestly. I was going to say interesting, but it's really not. It's very expected with the recent release of Rex Term. So, you know, a lot of people have been eager to try that deck out now that it's finally got its big boss monster. And its big boss monster is actually pretty good, being a one-sided skill drain on legs. I expect the Dinomorphia's representation will definitely plummet, especially as these new packs are being released, and especially whenever it happens, once Sprites and Tier Limits, although, I mean, honestly, once Sprites and Tier Limits come out, this is all getting shaken up, so that's not really fair to say, but Dinomorphia, I think over time, naturally will just kind of go down gradually, kind of like Scareclaws did, right? When we saw them being released, we saw initially that Scareclaws made up like a good chunk of the meta, but then now as time goes on, and as we'll see here in a bit, Scareclaws have really fallen to like, I mean, they're still around for sure, but not played nearly as much as they were when they first came out. I expect the same is going to happen to Dinomorphia once the like new hype kind of wears off of Rex Term there. So we are, of course, as always, ever going to take a look at some of the decks here in the other category. That's going to be like those rogue decks. So yeah, let's just go ahead and jump straight into that portion now. Alright, so here we have, this is what I like to call the Rogues Gallery, where I go into that other category and break down a little bit more in detail some of the top decks that make it up. So, coming in at 5 decks each. The number of decks, by the way, these are the number of each of these decks that reach Diamond 1 within this time frame. So I've included the actual quantity as well as the percent as well. So at 5 decks each, coming in at 2.2%, is going to be Spiral and Thunder Dragon. Thunder Dragon was actually split between Pure and Branded on Master Duel meta, so I decided to just combine them here. This made a little bit more sense to me. I will note, though, that 3 of those Thunder Dragon builds were a pure variant, whereas 2 were a branded, you know, they had Branded and Despia supporting them. Alright, at 4 decks for 1.7%, we had quite a few, actually, Marinesis. So here's where Marinesis has gone, now pushed down to the Rogue category. And I think that's largely due to Runic's presence in the format, or rather the presence of, like, another big Floodgate deck. That's why we're seeing a little bit less Marinesis floating around now. Megalith, which actually we saw a decent bit of during the Duelist Cup, so that's not super surprising, but it's a bit more than I expected. Orcus, Galatea going to 2, you know, recently, that makes sense. Zodiac is very surprising, because I haven't seen Zodiac. I haven't played with or against Zodiac in a very long time, so it's definitely surprising for me to see it here. At 4 decks at 1.7%, that's much higher than I would anticipate it. At 3 decks, at 1.3%, we have Branded Predaplant. Branded Predaplant saw significantly more play during the Duelist Cup, but as with Scareclaw, and as I suspect will happen to Dinomorphia, I think that was mostly new deck hype. The deck is definitely not bad by any means, but certainly as the allure of these new cards wears off, we're going to see less and less of the archetypes that aren't quite as meta relevant. Branded Predaplant being one of those. Dinos, it's a rogue deck we see quite a bit. Labyrinth is going to be a similar story to Branded Predaplant, where again we saw a lot more of it in the Duelist Cup because it had just come out. Now this is about where I expected Labyrinth to end up, although Labyrinth will have some significant new support at some point in the future, so it won't be here forever, but for the time being, yeah, this is about where I expect Labyrinth to be. Same with Madolche, that's been a very consistent, upper rogue presence. Pendulum Magician, we just talked about. Subterror, I've labeled this in the past as Guru Control, because that's pretty much what every relevant Subterror deck is. It's Subterror, Guru, and Fiendus with a bunch of Floodgate cards. So, Virtual World has a decent showing. I keep meaning to go back to that deck, but I need to craft a Beatrice and actually get some practice in with it. Virtual World is a deck that I'm personally a little bit curious about. It actually recently got a new rank 9 in the OCG, but I don't think the rank 9 is super good. It's basically just Imperm. It's nowhere near the level of VFD, so not enough, I don't think, to catapult Virtual World into the upper tiers where it once was. And then finally, at 2 decks coming in at just under 1%, we have Adagnister, Agents, Mathmech, which actually just today got circular. And actually, for those of you who are looking forward to this, I did manage to pull a couple of circulars, and I crafted the third one. So I will be trying out a Mathmech deck. I still have to do my research, because right now I have no idea how the deck plays. But do expect to see some Mathmech content here in the near future. Salamandrates and Sky Striker. Sky Striker is another one that you're going to see a lot of in the near future, because we unexpectedly, well, on top of getting Kagiri, which we were expecting, we unexpectedly got Sky Striker linkage as well, which that spell is huge support for the deck. Huge. So yeah, I very much can't wait to be trying that out. You'll see that in the very near future as well. And then finally, Scareclaws, as we've talked about before. This is about where I expected them to end up as well, probably about the same upper rogue category. Alright, so yep, those are the decks from the other category, the rogue decks. These are kind of like the top of those. Every other deck that was represented only had like one of it make it into the Diamond 1 during this last month. But there were some interesting decks, like I remember seeing Aliens, and I was like, oh, that's cool. So, yeah, let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about what the implications of this and what the meta will shape up as a result. Alright, so this final section I just like to cover, as I alluded to just now, some notable data trends. So let's talk about Swordsoul Tenyi. Swordsoul Tenyi has been consistently overtaking Branded Despia over the last few weeks. Based on this data, Branded Despia could even be defined as a tier 2 deck with Swordsoul as the only tier 1 deck. So I did look through not just the last month of data, but also like the last week, the last 2 weeks, because I just wanted to see, like, did Swordsoul Tenyi overtake Branded Despia like at a certain point in time, or has it been happening? No, it's been happening. Like if you look at the last week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, so on and so forth, like you'll see that in each of those sets of data, Branded Despia is significantly behind Swordsoul Tenyi. So this isn't like a recent thing, or like it's not a relatively recent thing. It's been happening, like I said, for the last few weeks, which is just so interesting to me. And again, based on the data we're looking at here, just because of the sheer discrepancy between the two, like, if I was only going off of this data and using that purely to define my tier parameters, I would put Swordsoul Tenyi as the only tier 1 deck right now. Branded Despia, according to this data, in my opinion, objectively, subjectively, in my opinion, Branded Despia, this implies that Branded Despia is tier 2. I don't think it's actually tier 2. I think it's still definitely tier 1. It is in terms of overall representation, and I think in terms of power level as well. I don't think this is, like I said, any huge indication of, like, this is also why I always talk about the difference between power and representation. Like, they are very relevant and both need to be considered for a metagame. Because I've been asked multiple times, like, why isn't a deck's place in the meta only defined by its power level? And in a perfect world, quote-unquote perfect, where people are playing decks solely based on power, then yes, I think that would be the case. But that's not how people choose their decks. People are very subjective when it comes to choosing their decks. And one of the things, as I've discussed earlier, is I think people tend to want to get to the upper ranks of the deck they are most comfortable with. That's why I think we're seeing Swordsoul so far represented over Branded Despia. So I guess it's more accurate to say, if we were only taking power level into account, then I think Branded Despia would be above Swordsoul. If we're only taking representation into account, then Swordsoul is the only tier 1 deck and Branded Despia is tier 2. The truth, as always, ever lies somewhere in the middle. I think the two decks are about equal power level, and they're also about equal consistency. But as I said earlier, I think Branded Despia has a slight power consistency over Swordsoul, whereas Swordsoul has a slight consistency edge over Branded Despia. So that's just my 2 cents about what this all means in terms of those two decks there. Flaunderies, let's talk about them for a second. Flaunderies have proven that they do not need Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds to stay relevant, having not moved at all from tier 2 since losing the card. That's pretty much all I've got to say about Flaunderies. That's actually not true. As we move into the tier limit meta, and it becomes more relevant to banish cards, specifically decks that can main Dimension Shifter without going out of their way to do so, are going to be a lot more relevant. And I think we're going to see Flaunderies, we'll actually probably see Flaunderies stay at about the spot it's at, even once tier limits move into the meta. So if you're looking for a solid, consistent deck that's going to be good for a while, I would say investing in Flaunderies is definitely not a bad idea. Runic, oh boy, let's talk about Runic for a sec too. Runic has completely pushed Eldritch out of the format. It is now the Floodgate deck of choice. This makes sense, as Floodgate support offers more advantage and disruption than, or Runic support rather, offers more advantage and disruption than Eldritch support. So, I talked a little bit about like the very vocal displeasure of having Runic in the format. And when I compare it with Eldritch, the degree to which people seem to hate Runic kind of makes even less sense to me. Oh, actually, it's not true. I think the reason that people really, really vocally hate Runic even more than Eldritch is because it's a mill deck on top of being a Floodgate deck. And it's just like, people don't like having their cards milled. It's funny because we haven't really encountered this much in Yu-Gi-Oh! As mill decks tend to not be relevant. The only really relevant mill deck before Runic was Empty Jar, and that was like way back, and that's some Yu-Gi Boomer days. But if we look at a game like Magic the Gathering, for example, right? Mill is a lot more relevant. It's not like Mill is always tier 1 in every Magic format, but in general, Mill tends to be a more relevant strategy in Magic than it is in Yu-Gi-Oh! Mill is like a very hated strategy by a lot of people in Magic because it just, people don't like seeing their cards getting milled. That's kind of what it comes down to. So I think that frustration is kind of that new frustration that, a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players haven't really experienced, combined with the old frustration of not liking Floodgates. I think is kind of fused into this perfect storm of people very, very being vocally against Runic. I don't know. I guess my response to that is what it's always been, which is, and not just for Runic, but just like in, decks in general. Like, if you're spending like a significant portion of time, and I consider a significant portion of time to be like more than 15 minutes, like leaving comments on YouTube and or Reddit talking about like how much you hate Runic and how it should be banned, like there's better uses of that time and mostly that energy. And it's also gonna just like, it's what we call tilting, right? Tilting being a poker term, referring to like being upset and that affecting your gameplay, because it will affect your gameplay. Like if you let Runic bother you so much that you spend your free time complaining about it, your mental state is absolutely affected when you're playing against it, and you're just not going to find outs or, paths to victory that you would normally be able to, because you're not expending mental energy looking for that information. You're expending mental energy being upset that you're playing against Runic. This has been especially true with, I remember seeing a post on the subreddit where it's like, I've never had more people concede instantly than when I played Runic. And I've noticed that too. And I think that's, that's something I've noticed, like, sometimes even on a person-to-person basis, honestly, where somebody will complain that Runic is unbeatable, that like they never win against it, and then like later I'll see the same person saying, oh yeah, if I see a Runic card I instantly concede. I literally saw that happen one time where it was the same person. It's like, dude, you cannot complain about Runic being an unbeatable deck if you literally concede the second you see a Runic card. Like, you're not even trying at that point. So that's, I don't know, that's my 2 cents about the Runic hate. My overall response to it is, like, there are better uses of your time. So that's pretty much all I've got to say about that. As far as Adamanticators go, the popularity of Adamanticator in the Duelist Cup translated to Diamond Ladder as well, but it'll likely fall off hard with Block Dragon going to 1. I don't think the power level of the deck falls off hard with Block Dragon going to 1, let me be clear about that. I think representation of the deck is going to fall off hard with Block Dragon going to 1. Certainly Block Dragon to 1 is not only a consistency hit, but also now, if it gets banished or if it gets negated, that's a much more harsh impact than it was in the past. So yes, the power level does go down, but I don't think it's going to go down nearly as much as the representation will go down, which again, as I mentioned before, is why it's important to note both representation and power when talking about a deck's place in the metagame. So, whew, that is, I think, about all I've got to say about these data trends here, and just about the metagame in general. So definitely let me know what you think in the comments of these results of these Diamond 1 decks, and yeah, without further ado, let's move on to the outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me, not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation, you do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is XLex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.